The air in the Grand Plaza was thick, not with pollution as the old histories described, but with the cloying scent of jasmine and the heavy weight of silent judgment. I stood among my fellow humans, a placid herd of two-legged animals, our faces blank, our bodies still. We were the silenced. Before us, elevated on the dais of judgment, stood Kale. He was a magnificent silverback gorilla, a creature of breathtaking power, his fur like spun silver in the afternoon sun. His knuckles, resting on the polished obsidian of the dais, were the size of river stones. He was the city's protector, our warden, the embodiment of the new world's order, the harmony. But today, there was no harmony in his eyes, only a deep, resonant sorrow that was somehow more terrifying than rage. Beside him, two chimpanzee enforcers held a man named Ben. I knew Ben. He had kind eyes and a way of smiling that seemed to remember a forgotten joke. He worked in the hydroponic gardens, tending to the cloned heritage tomatoes the bonobo elite so enjoyed. But Ben had committed the ultimate transgression. He had remembered not just a joke, but the very soul of our species. He had created art on a large, suspended screen behind the dais. The evidence of his crime was displayed for all to see. It was a mural painted with pigments he'd secretly crafted from berries, charcoal, and clay, on the back wall of a forgotten maintenance tunnel. It depicted a scene of impossible, forbidden beauty. A human family, a man, a woman, and a child, not with the placid, empty expressions we were conditioned to wear, but with faces alive with emotion. They were laughing, their heads thrown back, their hands intertwined. Above them, a stylized sun burst with rays of vibrant, defiant yellow. A collective, subconscious gasp rippled through the assembled humans. It was an involuntary ghost of an emotion, a muscle memory of shock and awe. We were not supposed to feel this. We were not supposed to see this. It was a violation of the first law of the harmony. You shall not echo the Creator's folly. Your hands will serve, not shape. Your minds will be quiet, not aflame. Kale raised a hand, and a profound silence fell over the plaza, broken only by the chirping of sparrows nesting in the ivy-clad skyscrapers. His voice, when it came, was not a roar, but a low, rumbling bass that vibrated in my chest, a sound both paternal and absolute. Ben of the silenced, he began, his gaze sweeping over the human crowd before settling on the trembling man. You were given sanctuary. You were given peace. You were sheltered from the chaos your ancestors wrought. We, the inheritors, gave you a world healed from the scars of your ambition. We asked for one thing in return. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Silence, a quiet mind, a peaceful heart, a surrender to the rhythm of the world, not a desperate attempt to impose your own. He gestured a great, black hand toward the image of the mural. This is the seed of the old sickness. This is pride. This is the ego that built bombs as readily as it built cathedrals. This is the fire that warmed hands and then burned forests. This is the dream that became a nightmare for every other living thing on this planet. My own hands, hidden in the sleeves of my simple tunic, were clenched into fists. My nails dug into my palms. I was a keeper of histories. My designated function was to maintain the central archive, a vast, climate-controlled vault where the remnants of the human world were preserved. Books I couldn't read, films I couldn't watch, data drives I couldn't access. I was the librarian of a dead language, the curator of a quarantined culture. I knew, better than most, the truth in Kale's words. I had dusted the spines of books with titles like The Theory of Nuclear Fission and A History of the Anthropocene Extinction. But I had also felt the worn leather of a volume labeled Sonnets of Shakespeare and seen the faded photograph of a ballerina, frozen mid-leap, a sculpture of human grace. Kale's philosophy was the bedrock of our world. Humanity was a beautiful, brilliant, but fatally flawed species. Like a child with a fondness for playing with fire, we had to be protected from ourselves. The Great Awakening, as the animals called it, had been the planet's immune response. When they gained consciousness, a collective sentience that connected them all, from the whales in the deep to the eagles in the sky, They had not waged war. There was no need. They simply took over. They managed the systems, guided the weather, healed the ecosystems. And they gathered the remaining humans, the traumatized survivors of their own self-immolation, and gave them peace. The peace of the gilded cage. The harmony is not a punishment. Kale's voice softened, becoming almost pleading. It is a mercy. To free you from the burden of creation is to free you from the curse of destruction. Then why? Why would you invite the storm back into the calm harbor? For the first time, Ben lifted his head. His eyes found mine in the crowd. It was only for a second, a fleeting, desperate connection across a sea of blank faces. There was no fear in his gaze, only a burning, heartbreaking intensity. It was a look that said, "Do you see? Do you remember?" He did not speak. He was one of the silenced. Our vocal cords were perfectly functional, but the habit of silence, enforced over 3 generations, had become an almost biological trait. We spoke only when necessary, in simple, functional terms. We did not debate, or sing, or tell stories. One of the chimpanzees prodded Ben forward. He stumbled, falling to his knees before the dais. The reclaiming was about to begin. It was not a physical execution. It was, in their view, an act of compassion, a neurological reset, administered by the highly empathic and psychically gifted bonobos. They would delve into his mind and gently, carefully, prune away the thorny branches of individuality, of memory, of the very impulse that led him to paint. He would be returned to the community, but the Ben who smiled at forgotten jokes would be gone. He would be just another placid face in the crowd, his inner light extinguished, leaving only a quiet, functional vessel. A fate, to my mind, infinitely more terrible than death. As the bonobo practitioners, their dark, knowing eyes filled with a placid pity, approached Ben, he did something unexpected. He twisted his body, his movements clumsy but deliberate. His hand, stained with the phantom colors of his mural, reached into a small pouch at his belt. The chimpanzee enforcers tensed, but Ben was not reaching for a weapon. He pulled out a small, gnarled piece of charcoal, the very tool he had used to defy a world order. With a last, desperate surge of strength, he threw it. It wasn't a powerful throw. It was a clumsy, desperate arc time, seemed as slow as the black shard tumbled through the air. The guard watched it. Kale watched it, but they did not move, as if confused by the gesture. It wasn't aimed at the dais or at any animal. It was aimed at the crowd, at me. I didn't have time to think. My body moved on its own, a ghost of an ancient instinct. My hand shot out, my fingers closing around the rough, dusty piece of charcoal just before it hit the ground. It was still warm, or maybe that was just the blood pounding in my ears. I quickly concealed it within my sleeve, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. No one seemed to notice. All eyes were on Ben as the bonobos placed their long, graceful fingers on his temples. His body went rigid, a silent scream etched on his face, and then he went slack. The light in his eyes, the light that had found me just moments before, vanished. It was like watching a star die. The empty shell that was once Ben was gently lifted and carried away. The crowd began to disperse, a slow, silent river of bodies flowing back towards their designated residential blocks. I moved with them, a single drop of water in the current, the piece of charcoal, a burning coal against the skin of my wrist. Kale remained on the dais, his great head bowed, a figure of tragic, absolute authority. I had been chosen, or perhaps I had been cursed. Ben had not thrown a piece of charcoal. He had thrown a question. He had thrown a legacy. The smooth, defiant object in my hand was no longer just a tool for drawing. It was a key, a weapon, a seed. As I walked back to my sterile, quiet apartment, the image of the laughing family burned behind my eyes. I felt a strange and terrifying sensation bubbling up from the depths of my silent soul. It was a feeling I had only ever encountered in the forbidden texts I was paid to preserve but not understand. It was grief. It was rage. And it was a tiny, dangerous flicker of hope. Ben had passed the fire to me. But what was I, a simple keeper of silent things, supposed to do with it? Was this an invitation to my own reclaiming, or a chance to discover what it truly meant to be human, even if it cost me everything. My residential block, Sector Gamma 7, was a testament to the inheritors' philosophy. The architecture was a seamless blend of nature and salvaged human technology, what the orangutan designers called biointegration. Towers of glass and white permacrete were draped in thick curtains of flowering ivy, their rooftops converted into lush gardens where bees, once on the brink of extinction, now hummed in blissful industry. Walkways spiraled through the air, connecting buildings like strong vines, and the gentle gurgling of recycled water flowed through channels carved into the polished stone floors. There was no litter, no crime, no noise. It was a paradise. It was a prison. My apartment was a single, sterile room. A sleeping pallet that retracted into the wall, a nutrient dispenser in the place of a kitchen, and a sonic cleansing unit instead of a shower. The single wall-sized window looked out not onto the city, but onto a vast, enclosed arboretum, a perfect replica of a pre-Anthropocene Amazonian rainforest. It was beautiful, meticulously maintained by lemur horticulturalists, and I hated it. It was a museum exhibit just like me. I stood in the center of the room, the piece of charcoal clutched in my hand. Its rough texture was a grounding reality in my sanitized world. The nutrient dispenser chimed, signaling the evening meal cycle. A beige, protein-rich paste, nutritionally perfect and utterly tasteless, would be available for the next hour. I ignored it. The hunger in my stomach was nothing compared to the gnawing emptiness in my soul, an emptiness Ben's mural had suddenly illuminated. The laws of the harmony were not written on stone tablets. They were woven into the very fabric of our lives, as invisible and essential as the perfectly oxygenated air we breathed. The first law, the law of silence, was the one Ben had broken, the prohibition of human creativity. The second law was the law of function. Every human had a designated role, a task that contributed to the maintenance of the city and the well-being of the animal populace. I was a keeper. Others were gardeners, technicians who maintained the old human machines, or carers who tended to the young of certain species. We were useful. We were tools. The third, and perhaps most insidious, law was the law of peace. It forbade strong emotions. Anger, passionate love, profound grief. These were seen as the volatile fuels of the old world's engine of destruction. Through a combination of environmental conditioning, subtle pheromones released into the air filtration systems, and the gentle but constant psychic pressure of the more gifted species, our emotional spectrum had been deliberately flattened. We lived in a perpetual state of calm neutrality, contentment without joy, tranquility without peace. To feel strongly was to be unsettled, a condition that, if left untreated, could lead to a therapeutic visit from the bonobo practitioners. My heart was pounding a chaotic, unsettled rhythm. I was breaking the third law just by standing here, feeling the aftershocks of Ben's reclaiming. I walked to the window and pressed my palm against the cool surface. In the arboretum, a jaguar, sleek and powerful, padded silently across a branch, its gaze fixed on some unseen prey. It was a perfect predator, a creature of pure, unburdened instinct. It did not question its place in the world. It did not mourn for a lost civilization. In its eyes, I saw the ideal state the inheritors envisioned for us, to be beautiful, functional animals, stripped of the burden of self-awareness. My function as a keeper of histories was the ultimate irony. I was surrounded by the greatest achievements and darkest sins of my ancestors, but I was forbidden from engaging with them. My job was to preserve, not to understand. Each day, I would walk the silent halls of the Central Archive. I would check the climate controls. I would run diagnostic scans on the stasis fields protecting delicate paper artifacts. I would use a soft bristle brush, guided by a laser grid, to dust the covers of books bound in human skin. No, that was a lie, a whisper from a forbidden story. They were bound in leather, but the thought, unbidden, was a crack in my conditioning. The archive was guarded by the Kennedy. Wolves, mostly with their unervingly intelligent eyes. They were not aggressive, but they were ever present, their quiet padding a constant reminder of my limitations. My supervisor was an ancient, scholarly orangutan named Master Ananda. He communicated through a complex sign language, his long, graceful fingers weaving intricate thoughts into the air. He was kind, in his way, but his kindness was that of a primatologist for a favorite subject. He saw my function as a sacred duty, to preserve the evidence of humanity's failure as a permanent lesson for the inheritors. For him, the archive was not a library, it was a tombstone. But there was a place in the archive, a section I was never to enter. The core vault. While the main halls contained the curated, approved history of human failure, the core vault was rumored to hold something else. The unedited records. The raw data of the before times and the Great Awakening. My grandfather, one of the first generation of the silenced, had been a keeper before me. In the last years of his life, his conditioning had begun to fray. He would whisper stories to me in the dark, his voice a dry rasp. Stories of cities that touched the clouds, of music that could make you weep, of the day the animals began to speak, not with their voices, but with their eyes. He told me the truth wasn't in the books on the shelves, but in the heart of the archive, behind a door that had no key. Holding Ben's charcoal, I felt a desperate, terrifying urge to find that door. What had Ben seen that made him risk everything for a single painting? He worked in the gardens, an open, monitored space. But he was clever. He must have found a place, a secret, a crack in the perfect facade of our world. The charcoal was a message. It wasn't just what he had created, but how. He had found a way. I looked at my own hands. They were soft, clean. The hands of a curator. They dusted, they cataloged, they maintained. They had never created anything. They had never held a tool with intent, only with function. I slowly, deliberately walked to the white, featureless wall opposite the window. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild bird in a cage. This is madness. They will know. The air sensors will detect the carbon particles. The psychic resonance of the act will alert the bonobos. This is suicide. But Ben's eyes, burning with that final, desperate plea, were seared into my mind. I thought of his laughing family on the wall, a ghost of a ghost. What was the point of this safe, sterile, silent existence if the very thing that made us was forbidden? A long life in a quiet room, or one single, brilliant moment of defiance? I lifted my hand. The charcoal felt alien, an artifact from another universe. I hesitated, my arm trembling. The sheer, terrifying weight of the transgression was a physical force pressing down on me. This was more than just breaking a rule. This was sacrilege. This was shouting in a church. This was spitting in the face of God. My gaze fell upon my reflection in the dark window. A pale, blank face. Wide, empty eyes. The face of the silenced. But as I watched, I saw a flicker of something else behind the eyes. A stranger. A rebel. A human. Was this the sickness Kale spoke of? The pride, the ego, the destructive itch? Or was it something else? Something essential, something worth dying for? Ben had made his choice. Now the choice was mine. I pressed the charcoal to the wall. The sound, a faint, gritty whisper, was the loudest thing I had ever heard. A single, dark line now scarred the pristine white surface. It was jagged, imperfect, and utterly, terrifyingly beautiful. I had made a mark. I had declared in the silent language of my ancestors, I am. The immediate question, however, was far more practical and far more terrifying. I had crossed the line, but how could I possibly hide it? The black line on my wall was a scream in the silent cathedral of my life. For an hour, I simply stared at it, my body locked in a state of pure, primal fear. Every hum of the building's systems, every distant chirp from the arboretum, sounded like the footfalls of approaching enforcers. I expected alarms to blare. I expected the door to slide open and reveal the disappointed, sorrowful face of Kale. But nothing happened. The world outside my room remained blissfully, unervingly calm. The machine of the harmony was perfect, but perhaps it did not look for transgressions this small, this personal. Not yet. Sleep, when it finally came, was not a refuge. It was a chaotic storm of forbidden images and sensations. I dreamt I was in the maintenance tunnel with Ben. The air was cool and damp, smelling of earth and metal. He wasn't painting a family. He was painting me. But my face was wrong. It was fractured, half of it the placid mask of the silenced, the other half contorted in a silent scream of agony and ecstasy. Then the dream shifted. I was running through the halls of the archive, but the books were flying from the shelves, their pages swirling around me like a flock of angry birds. The words, in a language I couldn't read, lifted from the paper and branded themselves onto my skin. I felt the burn of forgotten knowledge, the weight of a billion stories. I woke with a gasp, my heart a frantic prisoner in my chest. The room was dark, save for the faint, bioluminescent glow from the arboretum. My eyes shot to the wall. The line was still there. It wasn't a dream. This was my new reality. I was a criminal, a heretic. The fear was a cold stone in my gut, but beneath it, something else was stirring. A strange, terrifying exhilaration. The line on the wall was proof that I could still act, that the core of my humanity, the spark of individual will, had not been entirely extinguished by generations of placid servitude. It was a tiny rebellion, yes, but it was mine. My grandfather's whispers came back to me, clearer now, more urgent. He was a first-generation silenced, a man who remembered the world before. They think they saved us, Alara, he'd rasped, his hand trembling as he clutched mine. And maybe they did, but they threw the baby out with the bathwater. They took our fire, but they forgot it was the same fire we used to see in the dark. His inner conflict had been his defining trait. He understood the inheritor's logic. He had seen the sky turn brown, seen the last of the wild tigers on a flickering screen, mourned a planet groaning under the weight of 7 billion brilliant, selfish minds. He accepted the harmony as a necessary cure, but he could never forget the beauty of the disease. The soaring symphonies, the lovers' quarrels, the taste of real, soil-grown strawberries, the sheer chaotic, heartbreaking mess of being human. My own conflict was a pale echo of his, but now it was sharpening into focus. I lived a life without pain, without fear of hunger or violence. I would live to be 100, my health perfectly managed by the animal physicians. Was it so terrible to trade the dizzying heights and terrifying lows of human experience for a long, flat line of placid existence? For 3 generations, the answer had been a resounding, silent yes. But Ben's mural and my own jagged line had posed the question again. I knew I couldn't keep the mark on my wall. It was too risky. Using the sleeve of my tunic, I tried to wipe it away. It smeared, creating a gray, ghostly smudge, a phantom of my defiance. It was even worse. A faded scream was still a scream. Panic seized me. I needed to clean it properly. But cleaning solvents were centrally dispensed and their use monitored. A request for a carbon particle solvent for my living quarters would be an instant red flag. My mind, conditioned for passivity, struggled to find a solution. It felt like trying to use a muscle that had atrophied. Think, don't just feel. Think like they did, like the ones who built this world. I thought about the hydroponic gardens where Ben worked, the cleaning systems that were more robust. I thought about the technical maintenance shafts, the places the lemurs and smaller primates couldn't easily reach. Humans were still used for some of those tasks. My function was in the archive. It was the only place I knew, the only place I had any degree of autonomy, however small. The solution, if there was one, had to be there. That day, walking to the archive, the world looked different. The bio-integrated towers seemed less like a paradise and more like beautiful, unscalable cliffs. The placid faces of my fellow humans seemed like masks concealing a shared, forgotten tragedy. I saw the Kennedy guards not as peaceful wardens, but as wolves, their eyes missing nothing. I was hyper-aware of everything. The rhythm of my own breathing, the way my tunic swayed as I walked, the weight of my secret. Master Ananda was waiting for me at the entrance, hanging upside down from a ceiling beam, his long, orange arms folded across his chest. He signed to me, his movements slow and deliberate. The atmospheric particulates in Sector Gamma, 7 were anomalous this morning. A slight increase in carbon. Are you well, Keeper Alara? Ice flooded my veins. They knew. The system had already detected it. I forced my face to remain a mask of placid neutrality, a skill honed over a lifetime. I bowed my head slightly, a gesture of subservience. I am well, Master Nunda. All is in harmony. It was the standard, required response. He stared at me for a long moment, his dark, ancient eyes seeming to look right through me. Had he seen the flicker of panic? The lie behind my calm facade? He was an orangutan, one of the great apes. Their intelligence was not just logical, but deeply intuitive. He blinked slowly, then signed again. Anomalies are echoes of chaos. Ensure your sector is free of them. Proceed with your duties. He swung away, moving deeper into the archive with a grace that defied his bulk, leaving me trembling at the threshold. It was a warning. A gentle, paternal warning, but a warning nonetheless. They were watching. Maybe they didn't know exactly what had happened, but the machine had registered a flaw, a tiny crack in the perfect porcelain of their world. My duties for the day were in the lower levels, cataloging a new acquisition of preserved microfiche. The air was cool and smelled of ozone and old paper. As I worked, my mind raced. The smudge on my wall was a ticking bomb. I needed a solvent, and I needed to understand what was driving me, what this suicidal urge for expression meant. I remember my grandfather's last secret, the core vault. The truth is behind the door with no key, he'd whispered. But the door is not the only barrier. The real lock is inside you, Alara. The fear they planted there. I finished my assigned task, my movements automated, my mind a world away. On a hunch, a desperate, foolish impulse, I diverted from my designated path back to the exit. I walked deeper into the archive, into the older sections where the lighting was dimmer and the silence was heavier. I passed rows upon rows of human knowledge, all of it sleeping, neutered. And then I saw it. A simple, featureless metal door, different from the ornate gateways of the main archive. There was no handle, no keypad, no signifier of any kind. It was just a seamless plate of steel set into the rock. The door with no key. A wolf guard, lounging at the far end of the corridor, lifted its head, its yellow eyes fixed on me. It didn't growl, it simply watched. Its stillness was more intimidating than any show of aggression. It knew I was not supposed to be here. This was a boundary. My fear was a physical thing, a cold hand gripping my throat. Turn back. Go to your sterile room and your tasteless food and your long, quiet life. Forget the charcoal, forget Ben, forget the whispers of a dead man. But the image of the laughing family returned, a defiant sunburst in the darkness of my mind. What secret was so important that it had to be hidden not just from humans, but from the inheritors themselves? What truth was locked behind that silent, seamless door? The wolf's name was Lyra. I knew this not because we had been introduced, such formalities were not afforded to the silenced, but because I had overheard the chimpanzee enforcer speaking of her. She was younger than the other Kennedy guards, and there were whispers among them that her curiosity sometimes outweighed her discipline. Standing there, under the unwavering intensity of her golden gaze, I saw not just a guard, but a mind at work. She wasn't just observing my presence. She was analyzing my intent. My conditioning screamed at me to retreat, to murmur an apology and scurry back to the approved pathways. But Ben's face, pale and empty after the reclaiming, had burned away some of that reflexive obedience. For the first time in my life, I chose not to yield. I held Lyra's gaze, my heart a frantic drum signaling my terror, and I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod towards the seamless door. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, a confession without words. I know, and I know that you know. Lyra did not bark or move to intercept me. Instead, she tilted her head, a flicker of something unreadable. Was it interest? Pity in her eyes. Then, with a quiet sigh that ruffled the fur on her chest, she laid her head back down on her paws, though her eyes remained open, fixed on me. It was not permission, but it was not prohibition either. It was a choice, her choice, and she had chosen to watch. The door was as cold and impassive as I'd imagined. Running my hands over its surface, I could feel no seam, no hinge, no lock. My grandfather's words echoed. The door is not the only barrier. It was a puzzle, a test left by the last free humans. Not a test of strength, but of intellect, of the very ingenuity the inheritors sought to suppress. I thought of the stories he'd told me, of the interfaces and biometrics of the before times. My eyes scanned the wall around the door. Nothing. Just smooth hewn rock. The guards assumed it was sealed forever. Master Ananda probably believed it was a symbolic gesture, a tomb to be left undisturbed. But my grandfather had been a technician. He knew things. He had left me clues, woven into his rambling stories. They could talk to machines with their hands, with their voices, even with their blood. My blood ran cold. A biometric lock. Here, after all this time, I looked at my hand, then at the door. It was insane. The power systems would have failed decades ago. Unless they weren't on the city's main grid. Unless the archive, or this part of it, had its own independent, long-term power source. A final, desperate contingency from a dying world. I took a deep breath. The charcoal was still in my pocket, a small, hard reality. Ben had taken a risk. My grandfather had taken a risk just by telling me his stories. Now was my turn. I pulled the charcoal out, and with a trembling hand, I drew a small, crude circle on the wall beside the door, right where a keypad might have been in the old world. It was a mark of intent, an answer to a question no one had asked for a century. Nothing happened. Lyra let out another quiet huff of air. I felt a flush of foolishness. Of course, it wouldn't be that simple. I had just vandalized a sacred space for nothing. I was about to turn away, to accept my defeat and face whatever consequences Lyra decided to mete out when I noticed something. A faint, almost invisible light emanated from the center of the circle I had drawn, a pinprick of glowing dust motes. My heart leaped. It was a targeting laser, an input guide. It was waiting for something. Talk to machines with their hands. I pressed my palm flat against the wall, over the faint light. For a moment, there was only the cold stone. Then, a low hum vibrated through the rock, and a soft, blue light scanned my hand, tracing the lines of my palm, the length of my fingers. A panel, no bigger than my hand, slid open with a whisper of hydraulics, revealing a small, dark glass screen and a single, gleaming needle. A blood scanner. A genlock. It would be keyed to the DNA of the original creators of the archive. People who had been dead for 100 years. It was hopeless. But then my grandfather's last words to me, spoken on his deathbed, came back with stunning clarity. We are all that is left of them, Elara. Everything they were, for good or ill, is in us. Remember that. It is our inheritance. Our only inheritance. He hadn't just been speaking philosophically. He had been giving me a key. The lock wasn't keyed to a single person. It was keyed to a species. To us. To the unmutated human genome. With a sense of terrible, fated purpose, I extended my index finger and pressed it against the needle. The prick was sharp, a tiny spark of pain in my placid world. A drop of my blood, startlingly red, welled up and was absorbed by the machine. The glass screen flickered to life. For a second, it was a blur of static, and then archaic blocky letters appeared, glowing in a soft cyan. Genome verified. Homo sapiens. Access granted. Welcome, Keeper. With a deep thud that echoed in the silent corridor, the immense steel door unsealed. Heavy locking bolts, silent for a century, retracted with groans of protest. The door slid sideways, revealing a yawning darkness beyond. The air that wafted out was cold, sterile, and smelled of dormant electronics. I stood frozen at the precipice, the past opening up before me like a tomb. Lyra was on her feet now, her ears pricked forward, her tail held low. She took a hesitant step toward the opening, a low growl rumbling in her chest, not of aggression, but of awe and fear. She was looking at me, her intelligent eyes wide with 1,000 questions. I had just done the impossible. I had unlocked a door that, to her, was part of the very foundation of the world. I had proven that a human was not just a simple animal to be managed. We were still full of secrets. This was my trial, not just facing down a wolf or solving a puzzle. The true trial was what I would do next. To step through that door was to abandon all hope of returning to my simple, silent life. It was to embrace the chaos my ancestors had unleashed, to seek the fire that both created and destroyed. I could still turn back, and Lyra might still let me go. I could go back to my room, find a way to clean the smudge from my wall, and live out my days in the gilded cage. But my blood was on the machine. My mark was on the wall. My choice was already made. I took a breath, gave one last look at the curious, terrified wolf, and stepped through the doorway into the darkness. What truths and what fresh horrors lay waiting for me in the forgotten heart of the world. The darkness inside the core vault was absolute, a physical presence that swallowed the light from the corridor behind me. The door hissed shut, plunging me into a blackness so profound I felt a wave of vertigo, as if I were falling through empty space. The air was frigid, and the silence was different from the enforced quiet of the city. This was the silence of the dead, the silence of forgotten time. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at me. I was trapped. I had traded a gilded cage for a sealed tomb. But then, as my eyes struggled to adjust, a soft blue light flickered to life along the floor, tracing a pathway into the gloom. Motion sensors. The vault was waking up. One by one, rows of soft, indirect lighting strips activated on the ceiling, revealing the true nature of the space. It was not a vault full of books or artifacts. It was a data hub, a server farm. Racks upon racks of humming, silent machines stretched into the darkness, their surfaces covered in constellations of tiny, blinking lights, green for stable, amber for standby. This was the brain of the old world, perfectly preserved. I followed the illuminated path, my soft shoes making no sound on the polished floor. The path led to the center of the vast chamber, where a single console stood, a chair before it. It looked like a command center, a throne of information. As I approached the main screen, a huge, wall-sized monitor flickered to life. It displayed the same cyan text as the entry panel. Welcome, Keeper. Stand by for archival retrieval. Specify query. A cursor blinked expectantly. A query. I had a million. What happened? How did it happen? Who are we? But those were the questions of child. I needed something specific. My grandfather had spoken of the Great Awakening, the day the animals gained sentience. The inheritor's official history was that it was a natural, mystical event, a planetary antibody, Gaia waking up to save herself from the human virus. But was it the truth? My fingers hovered over the holographic keyboard that had materialized above the console. I thought of the sheer, impossible biological leap. Every animal, from insects to primates, all at once? It defied everything I had ever gleaned about evolution. It felt engineered. I typed slowly, the unfamiliar sensation of forming words for a machine both awkward and empowering. Query. The Great Awakening. Origin. The machine hummed, the sound rising in pitch. The blinking lights on the server racks began to flash in frantic, cascading patterns. Data was being pulled from a century of deep storage. The main screen went black for a moment, and then it was filled with a face. A woman. Her hair was pulled back, her face etched with exhaustion and a fierce, terrifying intelligence. A name appeared beneath her image, Dr. Eris Thorne. Lead biogeneticist. Project Eden. The date stamp read year 2088, just 1 year before the awakening. It was a video log. Log entry 734. Dr. Thorne's voice was strained, heavy with the weight of her work. The background was a sterile lab, filled with equipment I couldn't begin to comprehend. The simulations are conclusive. At the current rate of environmental degradation, cascading ecological collapse is no longer a probability. It is a certainty. Estimated time frame: 5 years. Humanity will not survive. More importantly, the biosphere itself, the very thing that makes this planet unique, will be rendered inert. Her eyes seemed to look directly at me, across the gulf of 100 years. All our other efforts have failed. The carbon scrubbers, the atmospheric reclamation, the de-extinction programs, they're plasters on a gaping, mortal wound. We treated the symptoms. We never treated the cause. She sighed, a sound of profound, world-weary grief. The cause is us. Our intelligence is a mutation, a glorious, beautiful, and ultimately terminal cancer on this planet. We cannot stop ourselves. The video cut to schematics, complex diagrams of viral vectors and neuroactive compounds. My blood ran cold as I started to understand. Project Eden is the last resort, she continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. We cannot excise the cancer without killing the patient. But we can introduce a balancing agent, a counter-neoplasm. We have isolated the genetic markers for abstract thought, for complex social planning, for higher-order consciousness in the human genome. And we have found a way, using a modified retrovirus with a near-instantaneous global transmission vector, to activate their dormant analogs in non-human species. I felt myself stumble back, my hand flying to my mouth. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't a spiritual event. It was a weapon, a biological weapon, deployed not to kill, but to uplift. We will give them a voice, Thorne said, a fanatic's gleam in her eye. We will give the planet its own army of defenders. We will force a balance of power. The simulations show a 98% probability that, once sentient, the collective animal kingdom will act to preserve the biosphere. They will see us for what we are, a threat. They will contain us. They will manage the world far better than we ever could. They will become the inheritors. The lie. The foundational truth of this new world was a lie. The inheritors did not rise on their own. Their consciousness was a gift or a curse from the very species they now ruled. They were not gods who had descended from heaven. They were subjects of the greatest, most desperate, and most arrogant scientific experiment in history. The log continued. It showed the final moments of Project Eden. Dr. Thorne, standing before a large, red button under a protective case. For everything we have destroyed, she whispered, her voice thick with tears, this is our penance. And for everything we have created, this is our legacy. May they be wiser stewards than we were. She flipped the cover and pressed the button. The video ended. I sank into the chair, my mind reeling. The harmony was built on a lie. Kale's paternalistic certainty, Master Anunda's scholarly wisdom, the entire moral and philosophical framework of their rule. It was all predicated on the idea of their own natural, spiritual superiority. But the truth was that their intelligence was human-made. They were our children, prodigal children who had locked their parents in the basement. Why hide it? The answer was obvious. To admit their sentience was a human gift would be to acknowledge a debt. It would shatter their moral authority. It would make them creators, not inheritors. It would prove that the same human ingenuity they so feared and suppressed was the very source of their existence. It would make the silenced not a herd of dangerous animals to be managed, but a parent race to be respected or at least acknowledged. The screen prompted me again. Specify query. My hand shook as I typed. If Kale and the Primate Council knew this, they were not just wardens. They were tyrants, deliberately suppressing a truth that would destabilize their power. But what if they didn't know? What if only a select few at the very top knew? Or what if Dr. Thorne had planned for this? I typed, Project Eden. Contingencies. The screen filled with text, but one file blinked with a red priority flag. Thorne_final_message.vox. It was an audio file. I hesitated for a second, then selected it. Dr. Thorne's voice filled the vault again, but it was different. Calmer. Resigned. If you are hearing this, then a keeper has remembered. I did not know if any of you would survive, or if you would retain the spark I saw so much beauty in. This vault, and the key to open it, was my final act of faith in my own species. The inheritors will not know of it. I have hidden it from them, burying it under layers of corrupted data they would not be able to decipher. It is for you, for humanity. The truth of the awakening is a dangerous weapon. It could inspire you to rebellion, which would lead to your extinction. It could cause the inheritors to fracture, to fall into the same tribalism and conflict that doomed us. I do not know if releasing it is the right thing to do. I have given you the truth, but I have left the choice of what to do with it to you. You are the keeper, not just of this data, but of our future. Whatever you choose, know this. I did not do this out of hatred for humanity. I did it out of a desperate, terrible love. The message ended. The silence that followed was heavier than before, filled with the weight of Thorne's legacy and the burden of my choice. I now held the truth, a truth that could shatter the world. A soft chime sounded from the console. A new message appeared on the screen, not from the archive, but from the vault's internal security system. Warning: unidentified Kennedy life form at outer door. Biometric signatures indicate stress and agitation. Warning: multiple primate life forms approaching corridor. Signatures match gorilla pan-troglodytes. Lyra, and she had brought company, or they had followed her. My time was up. The secret was out. But as I looked at the file on the screen, Thorne_file_message.vox, I realized something. This vault wasn't just a tomb of information. It was a broadcasting station. But who was at the door? Was Lyra there to help me? Or had she betrayed me after all? The hum of the servers seemed to intensify, a chorus of witnesses to my final moments of freedom. Kale was coming. The thought sent a jolt of pure terror through me, but it was quickly followed by a strange, cold clarity. The fear was for my life, but the clarity was for the truth. It was a heavy, solid thing in my mind, and it made me feel taller, stronger. Broadcast protocol engaged. The console blinked as if reading my thoughts. Dr. Thorne had planned for everything. Before I could respond, the door to the core vault hissed open. But it wasn't Kale who stood there, silhouetted against the corridor lights. It was Lyra. She was alone, panting, her fur bristling with anxiety. "They are coming," she said. Her voice was not a bark or a growl, but a low, guttural speech, a miracle I was now too shocked to fully appreciate. The inheritors could speak human languages, of course, but it was generally reserved for pronouncements and commands. To hear it from a wolf, spoken to me as an equal, was world-altering. "Kale, he is not with them. It is the chimpanzee enforcers. They were tracking me. They believe I am a dissident." My mind raced. "A dissident? Some of us, we question," Lyra explained, stepping into the vault and looking around at the humming servers with undisguised awe. "We see the lie. We hear the silence of the humans, and it does not sound like peace. It sounds like grief. We believe the harmony has become a cage for you, and a prison of dogma for us." So there was a schism, a secret resistance, not of humans, but of animals who remembered the chaos but feared the sterility of the cure. Lyra was one of them. She hadn't been standing guard. She had been watching me, hoping I would be the one to fulfill some prophecy, to find the key. "What lie?" I asked, testing her. "The lie of our immaculate conception," she said, her golden eyes boring into mine. "The myth that we simply awoke. The elder wolves, the deep ocean cetaceans, the old elephants, their memories are long. They remember a time before the Great Awakening, and they remember the change. It was not gentle. It was a fever of fire in the mind. It felt artificial, an intrusion. We have whispered of it for generations. You have just proven it." She gestured toward the console. "That is the truth, isn't it? The origin." I nodded, my throat tight. "Our creation and our curse. It is our shared history," she corrected, her tone firm. "And it has been hidden. For control. For power. The very sins the Primate Council accuses your species of." Suddenly, from the corridor, came the sharp, angry hoots of chimpanzees. Heavy, running footsteps echoed down the hall. "They are here," Lyra growled, spinning to face the door. "You must run. There are other ways out of the archive, old service tunnels. I can slow them down." "Run where?" I cried, a wave of hopelessness washing over me. "There is nowhere to go. The entire world is their domain." "The truth," Lyra said, turning back to me, her gaze intense. "You have it. You can't let them bury it again. Broadcast it. Let everyone hear it. Human and inheritor. Let the world break, so it can be remade with truth instead of lies." Her bravery was a stunning, humbling thing. She was willing to sacrifice herself for an idea, for a truth that would shatter her own world's foundation. She was displaying the very quality that Kale claimed was so dangerous, a passionate, rebellious idealism. The chimpanzee enforcers appeared at the doorway. There were 4 of them, clad in the light mesh armor of their station, holding stun batons that crackled with blue energy. Their leader, a formidable chimp named Zico, bared his teeth in a snarl of triumph. The wolf trader and the human anomaly, Zico chuffed, his voice a mocking imitation of Kale's deep tones. Together, the council will be most interested. Kale's sentimentality for these creatures has allowed this filth to fester for too long. It clicked. This wasn't Kale's doing. This was a power play. Zico and his faction, likely more radical than Kale, had been watching both me and Lyra, waiting for an opportunity to expose the weakness in the current leadership and seize more control. They didn't want to just preserve the harmony. They wanted to tighten its grip. "You will both come now," Zico commanded. "The human will be reclaimed. The wolf will be re-educated." Lyra didn't hesitate. She launched herself at them, not with the intent to kill, but to disrupt. She was a gray blur of fur and fury, a whirlwind of snapping jaws and powerful limbs. The enforcers were caught off guard, expecting a quick surrender. They jabbed with their batons, but Lyra was too fast, weaving between them, driving them back into the corridor. It was the chance she had given me. I turned back to the console. Broadcast protocol engaged. The blinking cursor was a question that demanded an answer. To press, it was to declare war. It was to plunge the world into a chaos it hadn't known for a century. Millions of humans, docile and unprepared, would be caught in the middle. The dissidents like Lyra would be hunted. The fragile peace would be shattered, perhaps forever. But to do nothing was to let Lyra's sacrifice be in vain, to let the lie continue, to allow my entire species to drift into eternal, placid oblivion. I heard a pained yelp from the corridor. Lyra. They had landed a blow. My choice was made. My hand slammed down on the holographic execute button. The hum of the servers rose to a deafening roar. The main screen flashed, broadcasting Thorn_final_message.vox. All spectrum transmission. Citywide. The console sparked and died. A failsafe. The broadcast, once started, could not be stopped from here. Zico, his face contorted with rage, finally shoved past the injured Lyra and stormed into the vault. He saw the dead console, the triumphant desperation on my face. He understood what I had done. "You have doomed them all, little anomaly," he snarled, raising his stun baton. "There will be no reclaiming for you. Only silence. The final silence." But before he could strike, a shadow fell over him. A presence so immense and powerful it seemed to suck the very air from the room. Kale stood in the doorway, his massive form blocking all light. He had arrived, but his eyes were not on me. They were on the cowering Zico and the crackling stun baton in his hand. And in Kale's eyes, I saw something I had never seen before. Not sorrow, not authority, pure, unadulterated fury. He had not ordered this. He had been betrayed. The sanctity of his command, of the harmony as he saw it, had been violated by his own subordinates. As Zico stammered, trying to justify his actions, a new sound began to filter into the vault. It came from outside, from the city itself. A low, rising murmur. The sound of Dr. Thorne's voice, broadcast from every speaker, every public screen, every personal communication device in the city. The sound of the truth. The sound of a world breaking. Kale looked from Zico to the injured Lyra and finally to me. His face was an unreadable mask of conflict, the face of a king whose castle walls had just turned to dust. The crisis was no longer about a single human's transgression. It was about the entire foundation of their civilization. And I was standing at the epicenter. Lyra, slumped against the wall, bleeding from a gash on her shoulder, met my eyes. She had gambled on me, on the truth. But as the sounds of confusion and rising panic from the city grew louder, a terrifying question hung in the air. Had we just lit a candle in the darkness, or had we ignited an inferno that would consume us all? The immediate aftermath was chaos. Kale, with a roar that shook the very foundations of the archive, disarmed Zico and his enforcers with contemptuous ease. He was not just their superior. He was a force of nature they had foolishly tried to direct. He commanded them to stand down, his voice a low thunder that promised retribution. But the damage was done. The genie was out of the bottle. Dr. Thorne's voice was now echoing through the plazas and residential blocks, a ghost from the past rewriting the present. I was not reclaimed. I was not executed. I was escorted by Kale himself to a place I had never seen. The high spire of the Primate Council, a chamber at the apex of the city's tallest biointegrated tower. Lyra, her wound hastily treated by an orangutan medic, walked beside me, no longer a prisoner, but not yet an ally in the eyes of the bewildered guerrilla guards who flanked us. The chamber was a breathtaking space, open to the sky on one side, offering a panoramic view of the city. A city that was now in turmoil. We could hear it, even from this height. A cacophony of animal calls, not the harmonious symphony of a normal evening, but a discordant jumble of confusion, anger, and fear. The inheritors were arguing. The truth had fallen among them like a stone in a silent pond, and the ripples were turning into waves. The Primate Council was assembled. Master Ananda, the scholarly orangutan, was there, his usual calm replaced by a deep, troubled contemplation. Several high-ranking chimpanzees, Zico's faction now conspicuously absent, chattered nervously. And in the center, on a simple stone throne, sat Kale. I was made to stand in the middle of the room. The keeper who had unlocked the past. The human who had broken the world. You have unleashed a storm, Elara. Kale's voice was heavy, not with anger now, but with an immense, crushing weariness. The dissidents are calling for a new council. The loyalists are calling for the immediate reclaiming of every human. The city is divided. The harmony is broken. It was never harmony, I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but the truth was a shield. It was control. A peace built on a lie is not peace. It is suppression. Master Ananda looked at me, his ancient eyes full of a new, complex emotion. It might have been respect. He signed slowly, his fingers weaving a question in the air that Kale translated. He asked if you understand what you have done. Human ambition, the very thing Dr. Thorne sought to contain, is what you have reignited, not just in yourself, but in us. Zico's ambition to usurp me. The dissident's ambition to reform the world. You have not brought truth. You have brought back the engine of chaos. Perhaps chaos is just the price of consciousness. I countered, the words feeling as if they were coming from somewhere deep inside me, from the collective memory of my species. Dr. Thorne's mistake was not in creating you. It was in believing that any single being or any single species could be wise enough to unilaterally decide the fate of another. She traded one form of tyranny, our own self-destructive nature, for another, your benevolent dictatorship. A silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the troubled sounds from the city below. My words hung in the air, an accusation and a thesis. Kale leaned forward, his great hands resting on his knees. This was it, the philosophical climax of our conflict. The debate between warden and prisoner, between God and creation. Look down there, Elara, he said, his voice soft, almost gentle. Look at the world we built. Clean air, pure water, thriving forests. We healed the world you broke. We gave your species a sanctuary, a life without fear, without hunger, without the constant, gnawing anxiety of your own mortality that drove you to such madness. We took away your burden, the burden of choice. He stood and walked to the edge of the open chamber, looking out at the city as twilight fell, the lights of the bio towers beginning to glow like captured stars. For every symphony your people wrote, you built a weapon of mass destruction. For every act of charity, you committed a genocide. For every child you loved, you poisoned a river that would kill the children of others. Your creativity is inseparable from your destructiveness. They are two heads of the same hydra. I did not want to destroy that hydra. I sought only to put it to sleep. He turned back to me, his eyes filled with a profound, tragic certainty. I'm offering you a choice. Not the choice Zico would have given you. A real choice. A keeper's choice. He laid out the two paths before me. Path 1, he said, his voice resonating with authority. You will stand before the city, human and inheritor alike. You will renounce the broadcast. You will call Dr. Thorne a madwoman, a relic of a broken world. You will claim the vault was a trap designed to sow discord. You will endorse the harmony, not as a lie, but as a necessary and benevolent truth. In return, you will not be reclaimed. You will be elevated. You will become the human emissary, a bridge between our species, living a life of comfort and purpose, helping us guide your people into a new era of peaceful coexistence. The lie will become the truth again, but this time, you will be its co-author. The storm will be calmed. I felt the seductive pull of it. To live, to have purpose, to save my people from the violent backlash that was surely brewing. It was the ultimate temptation, to sacrifice the abstract concept of truth for the concrete reality of peace. And the second path, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Kale's face hardened. You refuse. You champion this destructive truth. You embrace the chaos. If you do this, I will not be able to protect you. The loyalists will demand your life. The dissidents will make you their martyr. Your people, confused and terrified, will be caught in the crossfire. The fragile peace will shatter, and a war of ideologies will begin. The very thing this world was created to prevent. And you, Ilera, will be its first casualty. I will not reclaim you. I will not make you a silent symbol. I will simply let the storm take you. This was the choice. A comfortable life built on a noble lie, or a certain death in the name of a dangerous truth. It was not just my life in the balance. It was the fate of my entire species and the future of this broken utopia. Was I the keeper of their peace, or the keeper of their soul? Could they even have one without the other? Lyra, who had been silent all this time, let out a soft whine. Her golden eyes were fixed on me, not with judgment, but with a desperate, shared hope. She had risked everything for the truth. Master Anunda watched me, his expression unreadable. And Kale, the tragic king, stood waiting for my answer, the weight of two worlds resting on his immense shoulders. I looked down at my own hands, the hands that had dusted silent books, that had trembled as they drew a single line, that had unlocked the past. They were just hands. But the choice I made now would determine if they would spend the rest of their days weaving lies in a tapestry of peace, or if they would clench into a final defiant fist, even if it was the last thing they ever did. What is the purpose of soul if it is kept in a pristine, locked box, never to be risked, never to be tested? I took a deep breath, the clean, recycled air of their perfect world filling my lungs for what might be the last time. I looked Kale in the eye, my decision made. I choose the truth, I said. The words were quiet, but they resonated in the vast chamber with the force of a tectonic shift. I choose the storm. A low groan of despair escaped Kale's lips. It was the sound of a father watching his child step willingly off a cliff. Master Anunda bowed his great, orange head, a gesture of mourning for the peace that was now irrevocably lost. Only Lyra's tail gave a single, almost imperceptible thump against the floor. You do not understand the cost, Kale rumbled, his voice thick with sorrow. The price for this abstract notion you call truth will be paid in blood. A life without truth is not a life, I replied, finding a strength I never knew I possessed. It is a slumber, and the human race has been asleep for far too long. You speak of our destructiveness, Kale, but you have forgotten our resilience. You have forgotten our capacity for change. You see us only as a threat to be managed, but you never considered we could be partners. Dr. Thorne's final sin was not her arrogance in creating you. It was her lack of faith that we, her own kind, could ever learn to be better. I took a step forward, my voice rising with a passion that was a flagrant violation of the old laws. You built a perfect world with no room for imperfect beings. But imperfection is where growth lies. In struggle, we find strength. In failure, we find wisdom. In choice, we find our soul. You try to save us by caging us, but all you did was pause our story. You cannot be a keeper of histories and be afraid of the future. My speech was met with a stunned silence. I had not just refused his offer. I had dismantled his entire philosophy. I had held up a mirror to his benevolent tyranny, and the reflection was not flattering. So be it, Cale said, his voice turning to ice. His sorrow was hardening into resolve. He had offered mercy, and it had been rejected. Now, only judgment remained. The council is fractured. I will take you to the Grand Plaza. You will have your platform. You will speak your truth to the world, and the world will decide your fate. It was not a reprieve. It was a death sentence delivered on a public stage. The journey to the Grand Plaza was surreal. We were surrounded by a cordon of massive guerrilla guards, a moving fortress with me at its center. The city was in chaos. Animals were gathered in species groups, arguing, shouting, their voices a cacophony of dissent. Chimpanzees loyal to Zico's faction hurled insults at us. Flocks of birds circled overhead, their calls sharp and anxious. I saw a group of bears, ancient guardians of the forests, silently watching us pass, their expressions grim and thoughtful. They were the old guard, the ones who remembered, and the humans, they were the most unsettling of all. They were clustered near their residential blocks, their faces no longer placidly blank. Dr. Thorne's message had been a stone thrown into the deep, still waters of their conditioning. For the first time in a century, they looked confused. They looked afraid. They looked awake. Their eyes followed me as I passed, and in them, I saw the dawning of a question. We reached the Grand Plaza. It was packed, not with the silent, orderly crowd from Ben's reclaiming, but with a tense, volatile assembly of the entire city. On one side, the inheritors, a sea of fur and feathers, buzzing with conflict. On the other, the humans, a silent, waiting ocean of uncertainty. Cale led me onto the dais of judgment. He turned to the assembled masses, his voice amplified by the city's audio system, booming over the crowd. You have all heard the voice from the past. You have all heard the lies that have shaken the foundations of our harmony. He was attempting to frame the narrative, to cast the truth as a lie. This human, Alara, is the vessel of that chaos. She has rejected peace. She has chosen discord. Now she will speak, and you will see the poison of human ambition for yourselves. He gestured to me. This was my moment, my choice, to speak a truth that could ignite a war, or to shrink back into the silence that had defined my life. I looked out at the sea of faces, animal and human. My gaze fell upon the humans, on their lost, questioning eyes. I saw children clinging to their parents, their faces full of a nascent curiosity that had been forbidden for generations. I thought of Ben's painting of a laughing family. I thought of my grandfather's whispered stories. I thought of Dr. Thorne's terrible, desperate love for a species she had to betray to save. My voice, when it came, was not amplified. It was my own, raw, trembling but clear. My name is Alara. I am a human, and for 100 years, we have been silent. I did not speak of war or rebellion. I did not condemn the inheritors. I spoke of what we had lost. I spoke of the feeling of the sun on your face, not as a source of energy, but as a moment of joy. I spoke of lullabies sung to a child. I spoke of the bittersweet pain of remembering a lost loved one. I spoke of the urge to make a mark on a wall, not for fame or ego, but simply to say, I was here. The inheritors gave us peace, I said, my voice gaining strength, but they took our purpose. They saved our bodies, but they imprisoned our souls. The truth is not a poison. It is a medicine, a harsh one, yes, but it is the only thing that can cure the sickness of silence that has afflicted us all, human and animal alike. I turned to the inheritors. You are not our keepers. You are our children, a creation born from our desperation. You do not have to repeat our mistakes. The lie of your own perfection is a burden. Let go. Let us build a new world together, not as rulers and ruled, but as partners. Two conscious species on one fragile planet. Let this be day one. A profound silence fell over the plaza. My final word echoed and faded. Then, from a human crowd, A child, no older than 5, stepped forward. He had been listening, his head tilted. He bent down, picked up a small, sharp stone, and walked to the base of the dais. With a child's clumsy determination, he scratched a single, vertical line into the polished obsidian. A gasp went through the crowd. It was an echo of my own first act of defiance. A copy, a beginning. The spell was broken. A furious roar erupted from the loyalist faction of chimpanzees. She corrupts the young. This cannot be tolerated. They surged forward, but they were met by a wall of gray fur. Lyra and a dozen other wolves moved to intercept them, their teeth bared. From the sky, hawks swooped low, their cries a sharp warning. The bears on the periphery stood to their full height, a silent, immovable testament of support for a new way. The dissidents were making their stand. Kale stood frozen on the dais, watching the conflict unfold, his face a mask of agony. His perfect world had fractured, right before his eyes, into the two warring halves of his own soul, the desire for order and the recognition of truth. I do not know what happened to me in the ensuing chaos. Perhaps I was torn apart by the mob. Perhaps I was sheltered by the dissidents and became a symbol for their new movement. Perhaps Kale, in a final conflicted act, spirited me away to safety, unable to let the storm he predicted consume me. My story ends here, but the world's story, that had just begun, the final image is not of my fate, but of that single, defiant scratch on the dais of judgment. A mark that could be the first word of a new chapter for our planet, or the epitaph on its tombstone. The choice was no longer mine, or Kale's. It now belonged to them all. The price of consciousness, for every species, is the eternal, terrifying, and beautiful burden of choice. And on that day, for the first time in a century, the world was truly, finally, awake.